So that creates, next slide, please. What are the risks? Well, the risks are very simple. That's the one you can see. There is poor accountability, poor oversight mechanism in the allocation and distribution of economic incentive packages, and indeed a shortfall of needed help reaching the intended beneficiaries, meaning the true people in need. Because as you remember, basically a little bit less than 20% doesn't go where it should go. Next slide, please. Well, let's talk about the COVID-19. We all know that since mid-March of this year, COVID has been declared as a pandemic. And of course, member states, and not only in Colombia, everywhere in the world, but let's talk about Colombia, member states have necessarily relaxed their safeguard system to avoid a global economic collapse by providing an economic safety net for citizens and the business in distress. In this way, member states have also forced a little bit to trade compliance, oversight, and accountability for speed, for response and achievements, because they need a quick impact, first leading to the creation of opportunities. We are not talking of corruption here, we are talking of significant opportunities for corruption to thrive. While recognizing for the urgent action to prevent economic and social collapse, the lack of sufficient accountability and oversight mechanism in the allocation and distribution of economic incentive packages increased indeed the risk that corruption and fraud will weaken the impact of the measures being taken and result in a shortfall of desperately needed aid reaching the intended beneficiaries. And of course, it will touch first the poor and the population who are desperately in need. So, for example, as you can see on the screen, from March 16 to May 14, the procurement which has been carried out in the country in relation with the COVID-19 emergency, a little bit more than 9,200 contracts were identified through the country related to the COVID-19 crisis, for a value of approximately $400 million US. Of these 9,200 contracts, 4,655 of those contracts were found and assigned by direct modality. So it means no competition, direct modality. And that amounts basically 300 million of US dollars. 71% of the procurement in the emergency attention has been carried out at the territorial level, not the central level, so territorial level, as it is an equivalent of 300 million. And of course, this doesn't mean that all these contracts have been impacted by corruption. We are talking here of a risk, but there is a clear potential risk when you don't go through a competitive, pure procurement system, but because there is urgency, you go directly to some people, there is a clear risk of corruption. Let's move to the next slide, please. What is the role of the United Nations against corruption in the private sector? Well, you all know the Unodc, which is the first universal legal instrument to confront the scourge of corruption. It includes a chapter aimed at fighting corruption not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. This is the Article 12 that you have on the screen. Established that each state party shall take measures in accordance with the fundamental principles of its domestic law to prevent corruption involving the private sector, enhance accounting and auditing standards in the private sector, and where appropriate, provide effective, proportionate, and dissuasive civil, administrative, and criminal penalties for failure to comply to such measures. I think it's a very comprehensive and a very good article. Now the problem is, how is it implemented? For this, in line with this very good article, our office in Colombia, the office that I have the privilege to manage, within the Unodc context, has developed two cooperation initiatives. So how we do business, how we within this legal and regulatory framework, within this Untitled framework, how we actually work to make sure that we can improve, I would say, the understanding of the private sector and make sure that we will be able to move together in the right direction. So let's move to the next slide. So what are the results of our work with regard to private-public partnership? Next slide. So first, we have two initiatives. The first initiative, which has been developed by an entity named Projust, which is taking care of our crime and prevention and justice area. Two initiatives. The first is called Responsible and Secure Business. In Spanish, it's called Negocios Responsables y Seguros, NRS. And the second, in Spanish, is called Hacia la Integridad, and in English, it's called On the Level. So both initiatives seek to strengthen the collaborative work between the private and the public sector to prevent corruption and money laundering. Because, well, you know, I always use metaphor. I would say corruption, it's like a couple. You need to have a corrupted actor, but to have a corrupted actor, you need to have a corruptor. So they need to work hand in hand, unfortunately. And the corruption is not only touching the public sector, it's touching both sectors. So what is very important here is to make sure that both sectors, public and private, work hand in hand to minimize the risk, not only of corruption, but money laundering, because all this dirty money has to be laundered in one way or the other. Next slide, please. So the first success story called NRS. So it's in English, it's Responsible and Secure Business. That started in 2009. This initiative has been established from the need to an articulate effort in the country to strengthen the capacity of anti-money laundering system, and specifically with the objective of migrating from individual actions to collective action to get a stronger impact. So that is absolutely important. And when you want to move to something which is collective, you need to involve all actors, and that definitely includes the private sector. NRS was born as an alliance between the public sector, meaning regulatory and justice, and the private sector to prevent and control money laundering, smuggling in the business sector, but also terrorist financing. Bear in mind that we are in Colombia, there is a lot of money which goes not only for crime, but it goes also for terrorism. And it can go through Colombia to go wherever to finance terrorist activities. This alliance has contributed to the following 3 points. If we look at the added value for the private sector, it has been encouraging and facilitating the integration of anti-money laundering measures in the business sector. Make sure that they have a risk management model which will allow them to better detect their risks. With regard to the public sector, the idea was proposing measures to improve the regulation, the control, and the implementation of anti-money laundering system and corruption in the business sector. And with regard to the two sectors, public and private, making sure that we commit the public and the business sector to dialogue and articulate their work together within a responsible and secure business environment. That's what we want. Bear in mind that 96% of the companies say that was a weakness in Colombia. And I'm sure that would be the same figures would apply in most of the Latin American countries. These objectives have been addressed through 4 different approaches. The first is raising awareness. So it means disseminating awareness on the phenomena of money laundering, corruption, terrorist financing, contraband, to prevent entities from becoming victims of those crimes, because these are definitely crimes. The second one is about training, making sure that we can generate a teaching learning process from entrepreneurs and the merchants to develop their skills to identify and protect themselves from those crimes. So it's a train-the-trainer system also. We teach them, and then after we teach them, and they will learn, and then they will be able to repeat the very same action within their framework. The third point is co-regulation. We need to promote spaces for dialogue between the public and the private sectors for the adoption of anti-money laundering measures, absolutely central, and corruption, of course. And of course, cooperation, which is the fourth point, by creating effective channels of communication and exchange of experience between both sectors. Let's move to the next slide. And here on that slide, you have seen all the companies which have been involved in this entity, the previous slide. So with regard to the prevention as a commitment to sustainability, the NRS initiative has largely aimed at enhancing prevention as a generator for change and sustainability in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing. These awareness campaigns that are available to all of you, and a large number of you know those campaigns, campaigns like the one you will see. First one is called NY campaign. The second in English, the second one is again, the name of your company can be their campaign. And the third one is an interactive video to apply the money laundering risk management manual. NRS also contributes in reducing the risk, that's what we call de-risking, through raising awareness campaigns on this issue and empowering entrepreneurs. This implies considering the sectoral peculiarities and the perception of society and public institutions. Next slide, please. So with regard to control, we need to generate some specific knowledge. NRS also focuses on strengthening control for public and private entities. In that sense, we have elaborated and implemented what we call a sector risk management model. Indeed, risk is comprehensively analyzed in these tools, which are built with and for the specific sectors and clusters according to the level of risk of this economic activity itself. The models are in fact a tool for the company's administrator and managers to better know and accordingly manage and address those identified risks. To date, Unodc has published 10 specialized models for specific economic sectors, such as infrastructure sector, real estate sector, the gambling sector, the sector of public arts performance. In addition, models on land freight transport sector and model of foreign trade sector have been also developed to make sure that preventive measures can be implemented and controls can be developed to guarantee the permanence and the transparency of business reputation. Here we are talking, we know that risk zero will never exist, unfortunately. So we need, for the companies, they need to identify what are their risks to make sure that they can put in action mitigation measures to minimize those risks. Let's move to the next slide, please. So let's talk, for example, in the financial and real sector internship. This practical component of NRS, such as financial and real sector internship, is another clear example of successful collaboration and partnership between the private and public sectors. These specialized sectorial internships serve to exchange knowledge and experience between the public authorities and the private sector, that we call obligated subjects. They are aimed at improving the understanding of their respective roles, functions, and scope in order to strengthen actions in prevention, detection, control, reporting, investigation, prosecution, and of course punishment with regard to money laundering, terrorist financing, and corruption. So far, we have trained a little bit more than 600 public officials and 400 private sector employees. So 1,000 people have been trained in Colombia within this framework. It's good, but it's not sufficient. Those internships are still in high demand due to the positive impact of their methodology, which incorporates thematic and institutional aspects. As far as thematic is concerned, the private sector offers theoretical and practical knowledge about the product that can be used by criminals, of course. They know their area, so they can better understand and share the kind of practical knowledge, how this area can be misused by criminals. And as far as the institutional aspect is concerned, public authorities introduce aspects related to the investigation, judiciarization, and sanction processes to understand how the contribution of the private sector contributes to an effective application of justice. That's what we want. We know that crime will happen, unfortunately. So we want to make sure that first, it's properly detected by the private sector, and secondly, when it has been detected, it's going to be properly sanctioned by the public sector. Next slide, please. The second initiative, in English called On the Level, in Spanish, Hacia la Integridad, it's touched the business and government against corruption in Colombia. The first one was more centered on anti-money laundering and terrorist financing. The second one is more on corruption. This initiative was established in 2015 as a collective action project seeking to increase public and private dialogue and knowledge to strengthen the development and the implementation of measures addressing and corruption at the prevention level, but also as far as criminalization of corruption is needed, and making sure that enforcement can also do its job to be able to detect this corruption, working hand in hand with the private sector. And that has to be done within the framework of the UNCAC, the UN Convention Against Corruption. This project is developed under the framework of the Siemens Integrity Initiative to Prevent and Combat Corruption, Siemens AG. The objective of these initiatives is to reduce opportunities for corruption by enhancing public sector dialogue, improving government and corruption, improving government's anti-corruption frameworks and legislation, and creating a culture of integrity in the private sector. Next slide, please. So, with regard to this On the Level initiative, what are the specific objectives? The main goals are first, strengthen the legal framework for the prevention and fight against corruption in Colombia. And the second is, of course, enhance public and private sector dialogue and coordination to prevent this corruption and promote transparency in Colombia. And of course, we need to strengthen the company's abilities to better identify processes susceptible to corruption and implement actions to mitigate those risks and better protect themselves. So what are the target groups? Next slide, please. We have basically 4 target groups. The first one is the public sector or public entities, which have the mandate to prevent and combat corruption and to promote a culture of integrity and fair competition in the private sector. The second are the associations, guilds, and other networks of actors in the private sector, which have the responsibility of managing the interests of their members and accordingly to promote responsible and honest business practices. Then the third one are the companies of these very specific sectors, involved in the design and the implementation of anti-corruption programs and strategy based on risk analysis approach, which have to be defined in each individual context. Our main focus is to reach small and medium-sized enterprises and to cover a large number of cities in Colombia, in collaboration with the UN Global Compact Network in Colombia. Bear in mind the big number of small companies working, small and medium-sized companies working in Colombia. So these are the main targets because they are generally the ones who do not have a full integrity package developed in home. And the fourth, I would say, counterpart or actor, it's the civil society and the citizens. They have a strong interest in promoting and better understanding the corruption phenomenon and to take resolute action to ensure the implementation of the UNCAC. Why? Because first, they are the victims. When the price of a product, you have to add 20% to cover the corruption, someone has to pay. And it's always the end actor, meaning the consumer. And of course, that has an impact on the civil society itself. It means that when the consumers, when the people think that you can purchase whatever you want and whoever you want, then you damage the entire fabric of the society. And then after the society, the institutions do not have any kind of credibility. And it's why it is very important to work at those four levels. Never forget, I would say, the last level, which is also the first one, civil society and citizens. So let's move to the next slide. What are the achievements obtained within the context of this initiative? Since March 2016, a working group was established for the initiative with representatives of the public and the private sectors. These groups, because people need to talk together, we have 10 guilds, 18 companies, 3 public entities, and 1 investigation center. 5 working sessions have been held to discuss topics of interest to this initiative within this working group, including their annual work plan. So you have here all the companies and the private and public sectors were working together in Colombia to reach those goals and make sure that it can happen. Let's move to the next slide, please. The first phase results. We had good successes. I will mention some of these achievements. More than 1,000 participants have been trained in transparency and anti-corruption programs in companies and in strengthening of the Colombian legal framework regarding the liability of legal persons for acts of transnational and national bribery. More than 760 participants were trained in transparency and integrity as a mechanism to prevent and combat corruption in the public and private sector area in Colombia. We have launched a corporate portal named On the Level, Hacia la Integridad in Spanish, through an event with the participation of 154 representatives from both the public and the private sector. And 3 guilds of representatives trained in strategies to become the trainers. Let's move to the next slide. What is the second phase? The challenges that we will be seeing during the second phase. The second phase starts this year and will go till 2023. And thanks to the results obtained during the first phase, we want to direct an effort to prevent corruption in priority sectors, especially within the context of the COVID emergency, characterized by increasing risk of corruption in sector as the healthcare one. Please remember my 7th slide on the number of contract issued since the beginning of the COVID crisis. For the above mentioned, the aim for the second phase is to promote the culture of lawfulness in the public procurement in the energy and healthcare sector in Colombia as a mechanism to prevent corruption and better fight against corruption. Why energy and healthcare? Well, healthcare just explained due to the COVID crisis, and energy because it's a very big sector here in Colombia. As you know, Colombia is drilling gas, and that's something which is a large part of the GDP of Colombia. In this sense, the specific objectives are indeed, first, to generate a better understanding of the phenomenon of corruption in the Colombian public and procurement sectors, in those 2 sectors, create and strengthen collective action in those 2 sectors to promote transparency and integrity in these two businesses. And third, promote the use of the On the Level website that we have launched 1 year ago as a tool to enhance transparency and integrity for the multiple stakeholders, not only in Colombia, but also worldwide. And I'm going to end my presentation. Well, I invite you to join our initiative so that together we can work toward ending the scourge of corruption in the private and public sector in Colombia. Many thanks again, and I'm at your disposal for the remaining time for all the questions you wish to ask. Thank you to all. So now Daniel is going to give me a hand to make sure that...
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lapaque, for this presentation.
There's some issue with my speaker. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Okay. So perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Lapaque, for this presentation. Now regarding the different questions from the public, well, looking at the chat box, we don't have at the moment a question from the public, but we can wait a couple of minutes if participants have some questions regarding the two initiatives worked in our office in Colombia. We can wait like...
If there are no questions, it means that I've covered all angles, which is impossible, or that everyone fell asleep and then no one is able to ask for a question.
I don't think so. It could be it's 5:30 p.m. in New York. Who knows? But it was a great presentation indeed. I think there are no questions from the public. In any case, if anyone wants to make any question, you can add it on the chat and we can give you an answer afterwards in the following hours. There's one quick one from Star. There's one question from Elsa.
Yes, Elsa.
Yeah, of course. There's time, Elsa.
I have all the time for you, please. Thank you, dear.
I think she's taking her time to ask her question.
But the people cannot be connected. They cannot ask the question orally. No.
No, it's better. We were recommended for participants to put the questions on the chat box. So there's a question from Elsa. I wanted to know if there was any comparison with the other surveys conducted for X in Nigeria.
No, we haven't done this comparison. The survey we've done is focused only on Colombia, and I provided you with I would say the key numbers. But meaning, what is fascinating when you look at those numbers, you see that basically 90% of the population, for 90% of the population, it is normal to pay something. That's a scary number. Meaning, that is indeed a scary number. So bear in mind that before being in Colombia, I was in West Africa. So basically the numbers are the same in Africa, even maybe worse. So, but we don't have any comparison. Sorry about that.
Perfect. So another question from the public. There's still time. Okay, so yeah, if you want to make some questions afterwards, as I told you, you can put it down on the chat and we'll answer them afterwards, after this presentation, without a problem. Thank you all the participants for attending this live session. Thank you, Mr. Lapaque, for your presentation regarding the initiatives made by Colombia's office. And that will be it.
Yes, let me also thank you, Danielle, and thanks all the participants. I think it is important. I think also it is crucial to use the Colombian, I would say, good practices and to spread it as much as possible all around the world. Because we all know that you cannot fight against corruption only in 1, 2, or 3 countries. This needs to be global fight. Needs to be able to have this global fight. We have to make sure that all the countries are going to develop and use the same framework. That is the purpose of the UNCAC. The UNCAC is the framework. But the UNCAC by itself, I'm sorry, it's just a piece of paper if no one is implementing the UNCAC. And that's exactly what we want. So these 2 initiatives touching about money laundering, contraband, corruption, and so on are absolutely central when you want to deal with all this dirty money. And bear in mind that in Colombia, of course, it is a hot initiative, if I may say so, because the level of organized crime in Colombia is one of the biggest, I would say, unfortunately, worldwide. But there is no safe place as far as transnational organized crime is concerned, and there is indeed no safe place as far as corruption is concerned. So I think that, and they go hand in hand, and we have to make sure by developing good practices, it's not about cutting and pasting, it's about cutting, adapting, and pasting to make sure that what each individual country is going to develop within the framework of the fight against corruption or anti-money laundering is going to be consistent with the needs, internal needs, but also with the external needs within the framework of the UNCAC. So many thanks to all of you, and let's keep in touch. If you need anything, do not hesitate in dropping us an email. We'll be more than happy to answer. Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.